So where does my music, my sound come from? My sound comes from that I have been practicing my whole life how to convey emotion through this wooden stick, which is a clarinet, through my body, through my air, through my expression. And I've been practicing how to get what I am feeling and what I feel that the composer is telling me, asking me to express, and what I want to express and what I desire to express through the instrument. And so my sound is that I can do that better than I can do it with any other medium because the clarinet is really a part of who I am. It is, in a way, my life. And and my it is my voice. And so sometimes it's as simple as, and sometimes I don't even think about it anymore, but that when I'm expressing on it, um, it's as though I were sending out myself to the world, and maybe even more deeply than that. It is my expression of who I consider myself, who I consider my spirit to be, what I consider is all the stuff that is um, metaphysically who I am through that instrument.
And how do you think your being a Black man is expressed in this way as well? I mean,
Okay.
not just a Black man, like
Yeah.
the first, the only, and that list can go on and on and on and on
Mhm.
and on.
Mhm. No, I think who we are, like I said, gets through. Um, eh, how should I say? Everything that you are gets through enveloped into your sound,
Mm,
gets enveloped into how you express
mm,
yourself. So I believe that people, you can try as much as you want, but people can't remove you can't remove yourself from from you, from your art, from your voice. You can try. I don't know why you would want to though.
fair enough.
Because the value, the beauty, the depth, all of that stuff is in your art, in your sound. And I feel like being a Black man is, how shall I say, it is deeply woven into how I express myself and my instrument, but also what is expressed within that sound. And it doesn't matter if I'm playing Beethoven, doesn't matter if I'm playing Bach, Brahms, um, you know, Billie Holiday,
Right.
like who I am as an artist, who I am as a musician, and in my sound and my expression, I am the combination of all of those things that my parents gave me, that my family fed me, that they nurtured in me, that their mothers and their ancestors gave them and passed on to them through time and through energy and through grit. I do feel like there is a legacy there of power, and power through art from my parents for sure. They were visual artists, but I saw their expressions of what art is growing up. My sound has been affected by everything because I'm also like, not when I picked up the clarinet for the first time after a while, there's this concept of like not being um, not knowing what's going to come out as well,
Yeah.
like not something not being
Yeah.
predictable as
Yeah.
much, so there's that combination of you being slightly out of shape physically
Yes. Yeah.
to do the thing, and yet there's also the kind of the feeling of being happy that you're still able to do it. I hadn't been playing very much before I made that video, the Take Two Knees video for George Floyd, and I listened to it, and there is what strikes me whenever I hear it, and somebody plays it back for me or something, is that because I know my sound so much, I know the way I play. I thought it was interesting that I can hear the pain I was feeling that day when I
Mm,
did it. Like I
mm,
can hear it. I can hear what I was trying to express.
mhm,
Even though I was the one expressing it, I
mhm.
have listened back to it because of being in interviews or situations where I'm being asked to, other people are being shown it or, to listen to it. And it strikes me very much so because, it wasn't like I had, was at a recording studio. I did this at home, and yet I heard in my sound that day what I felt that day, which is
Mm.
all of the pain and the frustration and the bottomless pit that I felt like I was in when I was expressing this. And in some of the notes that I hit, I specifically hear and kind of can feel what my body was doing to produce that
Yeah.
sound. It's like
Mm,
that extra tension, that extra,
mm,
like strain, that extra pain, all of that stuff is in and over time develops in the way you play and develops in how you get those sounds out and how you can express this through this lifeless piece of instrument, like what you're trying to say, and so I'm not, there's no better or worse in that situation.
Oh,
There
yeah.
is just
It's just
like
more.
that's what
There's
it
more of
is.
you.
That's what
Mhm.
it is. Yeah,
But
like
there's more,
we've experienced.
and
Yeah.
that's beautiful. Go back a little bit and think about the day or the time or the week, however long it was, that it took you to understand that something was very, very different.
If I look back on the past year, as this is coming up on very close to the anniversary of when everything was the world shifted dramatically from what we think of as what we thought of as our norm or what we thought of as our lives before that. So what I mean by that is that the kind of unconscious going on about our business
Mm,
was abruptly shifted. I think what what really hit is all of those things that I think for me I was anxious about, even on a subconscious level, just like the normal fears of death, if you mean,
Mhm.
if you will, the normal fears of what's going to happen in the next day, the normal fears of what's going to happen to my family and my friends, all of those things that we kind of hold in our minds and hold in our bodies and our hearts and our spirits, that maybe we don't discuss enough. All of those things a year ago today basically hit really hard and came up to the present, to the consciousness, you know, deeply. And that's kind of, a lot of that is where I was a year ago, in that place of fear, in that place of vulnerability. And a lot, I think we all kind of collectively were somehow in a similar place.
When you think about fear, what is it that you were afraid of?
I think I was afraid of many different things, but one of the big ones was a simple one, and I think it stems from kind of just being kind of a health conscious person. Like, every year thinking, oh, what is going on with my body? What is going on with my mind? I'm getting older. You have more fears about what's going to happen. You have more life kind of life things that life has given you, things that the world has given you, and you think, oh, if I just turned 40 last year, I mean, I just turned 41 last year, and I was in that place. And so really a lot of it was thinking about, not we didn't know that much about this virus, back then.
Hmm.
We didn't know, like, how we didn't really know how you got it. We didn't know very much of anything. And so I'm sitting there, and I had just come off a mini tour with my brother and our trio. And we were in, Oklahoma, we were in Kentucky, we were in DC, we were all over. And I just flew back into town, and all of a sudden I hear about this thing that we're all facing. And I'm like, you know what? For the next 2 weeks, I think I might have called my brother every single day,
Mm.
because I was just so afraid. We didn't know how it affected people, if this virus just straight on killed people right away. Like, we didn't know anything about it when I think back on those days. So that's just a vulnerable place. If you have any sort of like concern about that, I probably am, I officially self-diagnosed myself as being a little bit of a hypochondriac anyway. And this, all those tendencies, all those anxieties, all those things come out, you know, like it was raw. I think it was very real. And they always tell you that one learns to have gratitude only when they can face the realities of life,
Mm.
you know. And yet we often don't get a chance to do that until we are actually at that moment of death. And so, in a way, I think, to just go on about it for another minute, in a way, I think that in that sense, the year that we have just experienced, or has just flown by, has been one that could be seen as being a blessing in a lot of ways, even with all of its terrible um, realizations and awakenings and reckonings and observations about the world, and that kind of the consciousness coming forward, if we were living our lives with any amount of kind of unconscious autopilot.
What was your reaction, and how did you handle watching your calendar disappear? Because I imagine you watched that also.
Yeah, that was really interesting. One part of me thought that one part of me, in a way, appreciated for a small period of time, a very small, short period of time, appreciated the feeling of freedom that came with calendar disappearing. And the other part of that is a sort of um, slow boiling panic, I would call it. And it was a combination of those two things, which is I'd never experienced before, of course. I mean, I had, as a musician, as a professional person, from the time I was 20 years old, um, I'd been steadily employed by orchestras and teaching and all of these things 20 years straight. That's half my life. And that's a very lucky thing. And I'm very grateful for that. But the sense of just stopping, like driving toward a cliff and then stopping right before it, and like kind of floating above it, even into the canyon, was very scary. You know, very scary, and it really I had to shift very quickly. Fortunately, I didn't stop everything because I'm the artistic director of the music advancement program through the Juilliard School. And this has been really a light in all of the past year for me. It's a program designed to reach underserved communities and underserved students, young students from the ages of 8 to 16 in classical music. Those early weeks there and the months um, were very interesting because we had to kind of reevaluate what we were and actually re-examine what we were doing together as teacher student, as mentor and mentee, because we had to kind of put down the clarinet. You know, we had to put down the music to examine, to make sure everybody was okay. A lot of what I was doing in those early weeks, and even what I'm doing still in a lot of my lessons, is finding out if everyone's okay.
Mhm.
Because, as an artist and as musicians, as somebody who's training, generations of musicians to come and to dedicate their lives to an art form, a lot of that, a lot of what's really important about doing that really well is making sure you're in a mental space and emotional and spiritual space that you can do that you can try to give your all emotionally for an art form to like create. And that takes a lot of sacrifice, that takes a lot of dedication, and it takes a lot of energy. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody was coming along okay, you know, like even though no one was okay, like we had
Mhm.
to kind of make sure that I wanted to take care of them. So I was like, look, we would normally be doing this right now, but what do you want to do? What do you want to play? What are we going to play? What do you want to talk about first? And so we needed to spend, because now we're like on this computer, we're like not seeing each other. That's a part of, those are, this whole concept of social distancing is interesting because we'd never heard this term before. I'd never heard the term before. But what you don't realize is that that's such an important part of um, how we feel through the world, how we hear through the world, how we listen to each other, how we connect with each other, which is what music is all about, is about those connections. So to have to shift to doing that online, to have to shift to doing that in front of a computer screen, having to make those things happen and to also be able to still reach out to people. I mean, that was really really interesting. That was an interesting time. And so that's what I focused on a lot at the very beginning was, are we doing okay? And I think, and then it became, um, why does music matter? Then it became, why does your art matter? Like, why, what is the purpose of this for you? Because I had to evaluate the same question. We were all asking ourselves the same question. So for that moment, I mean, that's why I think it's a great relationship when you have a teacher-student relationship, because sometimes you think it's a vertical relationship, but really it's not. It's like, we are doing this together. We are in this together. And so we have to figure out together, what is your purpose? What is our purpose? What is my purpose? And for me, it helped to remain clear about that, to actually have those moments, of teaching and trying to adapt our programming and our schedule for our younger students at the MAP program, to this new world.
I just found something before we started to talk in my journal that I want to share. Red darts of cardinal crossed me on my path. Complicated call and response songs sung across trees accompanied me the whole way. Among them, found reasons to continue putting one wary foot in front of the other before coming to rest at the base of a tree. I rest my head in its hollow. It already knows what I am trying to learn, what I am walking toward and away from every day.
Hmm. Wow. So that really pleases me to hear,
No, tell me why.
because it brings me back like maybe a year ago, where a couple different things, where I was reading a book, a novel called The Overstory. And The Overstory was interesting because it was a little quite long. And halfway through it, I didn't really, I was telling my wife, I don't know if I like this, but I kind of do, but I also don't know what it's about. But let me tell you, it's basically about trees,
Hmm.
but it's not just about trees. And just when you said you stepped up to the hollow and the tree, it knew what you were, where you'd been and where you were going, kind of. It reminded me of this story because there were these plots that were, placed on top of, um, a lot of these trees with this history that is greater than ourselves, right? The trees have knowledge, the earth has knowledge that is greater, the creator, the universe encompasses all, right? And so time is, um, something that we consider in our very small way. And we consider our lives as being very full and long in a way, if we're lucky, and all these things. But really, as we know, it's not, you know, it's just a blip. If you think about the span of the life of a tree, for instance, they've been here a lot longer than we have and will continue to be. And so I got this image of that and that story and how that created some meaning for me, and it carried a little bit further into the spring as well. And this time we have, now that we transition and we think about transitioning from winter to spring and what that means, and from the early days of the pandemic when it was still kind of cold, this to the springtime, I spent a lot of time hiking. We're up in the Bronx, we're up in Riverdale, and there are a lot of trees up here. And at that time, it's like, what do we do? What are we seeing people? What are we supposed to do? So we would go, take my daughter, and we would go to the woods. There's some woods near our house, and it was one of the most enjoyable things that we did. So if you were to ask me one thing, what was one memorable thing about last year? That's what I will remember about 2020 is I spent a lot of time in the woods. Like this is in the city right here. And then we would go up north a little bit to Westchester and go out to the woods up there. And there was so much enjoyment because, you know, for a 4-year old, and then also as a 41-year-old,
Mm.
some of the pleasures that we got from those days out were so beautiful and special. And I also remember a moment um, where we hadn't been out very much at all. We hadn't been outside really as much. It felt like that at least. We were kind of up here, in New York, as we all know. I was afraid to like just go out and breathe the air, period. Like, I mean, I was when I remember what I remember actually about that fear, just to go back to that, is that at some point I was watching the news in March. And then in April, I stopped watching the news because I couldn't deal with the pain of seeing the numbers rise. I couldn't deal with that reality and that amount. So I couldn't do it, because my symptoms, quote unquote symptoms of COVID, which were shortness of breath, which were all of these things, I was having them all because every time I would look at the numbers rise on the TV, I would diagnose myself with this
You're
disease.
going to be next, right?
Yes, yes, totally. It was real though. It was so real to me.
Mhm, mhm.
And I remember so not going out for a long time. And then we took a walk in the neighborhood around the time that the trees had shifted, that nature had transitioned, and I had like really missed that transition. I remember being in the woods when things were brown and explaining to my daughter, like, there's a cycle of the earth and there's a cycle of life, that these dead trees are giving life to animals and to insects and all of these things. And then we were just taking it. And then I don't know how many weeks went by. I don't know how many months went by. That's a common thread for me also within the last year is that I'm not sure about time,
Mhm.
right? So we went out and were walking down the street, and there's a very nice neighborhood nearby us with these big, beautiful houses. And I remember thinking, wow, this is so green. And it was after I'd read the overstory, and I still had that in my memory, and I was like, wow, you know what? Now the book makes sense to me so much more now, because I was like, sometimes you have to have things taken away from you to realize how beautiful they are.
Hmm.
Sometimes you have to be deprived of something to appreciate the overstory, so to speak, or to look beyond yourself. And so when you read what you just read, and you mentioned the red cardinals, and you mentioned the trees, and you mentioned your footsteps, and you think about what all of that means, and what it is that often we don't often see. We're looking, but we don't see. you know we're hearing, but we're not listening. And I think just listening to you read that poem, I guess, is that your
I don't,
creation?
it's an
That's
entry in my journal.
yeah. It's just, oh gosh, it's just really like as I mentioned, it pleases me to hear that, just because something about our thoughts and like poetry, for instance, which I think that is that it is the the life beneath the words, or the emotions beneath, beyond the painting, or within the work of music, that gives us life and maybe heals us.
Mm.
So simple journal entries become something that are something more. So maybe they become art, they become music, they become creations that give us, our humanity, I believe. And so that was really pleasant. It just brought back some of those memories about that transition.
As things begin to open, as people, we contemplate going back into spaces where we can perform live with people, what is it that you want to see in the audiences, in the orchestras? What are you, do you have some hopes about what what might be possible if we let go of normal?
Yeah, I think my hope, my hope is that we choose to go forward thinking about how we can really go about things with like extreme openness and extreme kindness to each other, but also that we see that by doing that and by figuring out how we can change the change the way normal was always done, to like be able to shape things in a better way for more people, so that I see more young people and more young, especially from my experiences, if we see more young black and brown people in the audiences, if we see more voices on stage that are different, if we see and hear and can appreciate all of the great voices of the past, but also the present, that are perhaps different than the way normal was done before on classical stages, especially. That's what my hope is. And that we can go about things with a little bit more grace, and a little bit more awareness, of things that we've taken for granted and people we've dismissed, and that we can, go forward in that way, which I think is not, in a way, it's not too much of an ask, but in a way it is, like,
Mm.
so that's why I said these are only hopes, and we will see. But I think if we look at it like an actual transition, like we spoke about earlier, that some of those transitions, maybe they come out of like the worst of us, but they bring us to a place that is the best of us. And that might be nice to see.
Anthony, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really I don't know what to say, but I appreciate you so
To say
much.
anything. I appreciate you. I know it's not easy to keep talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, especially when you're being asked all the time, or at least I've been asked a lot, to be hopeful, to explain to people how they can be hopeful in this moment. And my gut response is always no. I want to tell people to be exactly as you are, to feel what you feel, so that we don't have to keep repeating it.
Right.
And so part of the gift of all of this for me is, like I said, to be in spaces with folks who are at once perhaps not feeling weary and moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
That there it is.